Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jack Chapple Show. So what I want to talk about today is one of my favorite business and history stories of all time. It is the Great Horse Manure Crisis of 1894. Hopefully you guys will like this one. So let's jump into this here. Let's take you back to the late 1800s. Okay, so at the time, in the late 1800s, in cities, the main source of transportation to get around was horses, all right? Unless you had the luxury of being close to everything so you could walk to the market or walk to work, you had to take a horse somewhere. So this led to a really dense horse population within cities, okay? So for example, in London, they had 50,000 horses in London, in the city of London alone, okay? In New York, similar thing. They had 100,000 horses in New York, and I was doing the math on this. That works out to, they had 150 horses per square kilometer in New York at the time. 150 horses per square kilometer. Tons of horses everywhere, okay? So this, as you would assume, would lead to some problems, okay? Like this one, what it is called, the horse manure crisis. It's because horses produce 30 pounds of manure a day. 30 pounds per day of manure. Tons, all right? This isn't even including urine, which apparently they do 1 to 3 liters a day from what I was able to find. This isn't including some other stuff, but like this is just manure, okay? 30 pounds a day. And now the manure would just be littered around the street, and it was causing smells and it was causing lots of problems because it was attracting flies, for example, especially, you know what, also this too was horse carcasses, okay? So at the time, horses only lived about 3 years, sometimes 4 years. So it was pretty common on your way to work, seeing a bunch of dead horses and flies running around them and horse manure everywhere. It smelled terrible. And it was attracting a lot of flies too, by the way. So these flies actually carried typhoid fever. All right, so flies were everywhere. They love manure. They love dead horse bodies. And so there were flies everywhere, and everywhere smelled like poo, and all these fecal diseases were coming up, and everything was horrible, okay? So this led to essentially a horse manure crisis. This was brought up in an article by the Times in London, and it said, and this was a quote from the newspaper, they said, in 50 years, every street in London will be buried or buried. Do you guys say buried or buried? I don't know. Buried under 9 feet of manure. All right? People had legitimate fears that cities would collapse because of horse poop. And you know what? 30 pounds a day, and if you have 100,000 horses, 3 million pounds of horse manure was being produced in New York every day. That's a ton. And do that over the course of years and years and decades before that when they had horses. Poop everywhere. All right, this is causing people to get sick. Typhoid fever was killing hundreds of thousands of people a year at the time too. A lot of the reasons because of this, because flies would be attracted and they'd spread it, they'd be everywhere. It's causing so many problems, okay? And so this problem got serious enough in 1898 that what is this here? Is that there was an international world meeting about urban planning to see what they could do about the horse manure problem. Specifically, could they spread cities out? Could they build stuff certain places? Maybe they could build horse washrooms or something along the way. Nothing could be done. All right? And so they came up with nothing. They had no plan. So they were like, okay, in the next 50 years, we're just going to have to move and make new cities. That was kind of the plan, the urban planning meeting. That's what they had from that. This is that's all. The smartest minds in government couldn't find a solution to this problem. All right? Keep that in mind. All right? However, I like to bring up that necessity is the mother of innovation or invention. All right? So there was a necessity to solve this problem, but it wasn't solved on purpose. What do you think happened? What do you think happened? All right, well, let's take you back here. There's a 28-year-old at the time. He worked for, I think he worked for the Edison company, actually. I think I have it here, yeah. So he was an engineer working at the Edison Lighting Illumination Company. Edison had like 50 companies, man. Edison had so many companies. People don't realize that. He had branches of every single kind of company you can think of. Anyways, there's a 28-year-old engineer. He got hired there in 1891. He worked there for a couple years. And then he had saved up a little bit of money. He had heard of someone named Carl Benz that started making some weird transportation machines. He didn't know too much about it, but apparently it was a thing that was happening in Germany from a guy named Carl Benz. Apparently these machines use some sort of fossil fuels of some sort, didn't know much about it. So over the next few years, this young 28-year-old engineer that is working for Edison, he's like, you know what, I'm going to start trying to experiment with my own, try to make my own gasoline kind of motor thing, see what works, see what liquids don't, just see what I could do with this. So over the course of a few years, he had a few successful experiments, and then he built something in 1896. He called it the quad cycle. The quad cycle. So this was a thing. It was powered by a motor, and it was tested on June 4th, 1896. The thing moved like 1 mile an hour or something, 2 miles an hour. Super, super slow, but he built it. It worked. And so over the next few years, he's like, oh, this is kind of cool. I like this quad cycle, but let's see if we can improve this. All right, let's try and make this an actual business as well. So he founded his company named after himself called the Henry Ford Company. The Henry Ford Company. All right. And obviously this engineer is Henry Ford. At the time when he started Henry Ford Company, I think he was about he's mid-30s, somewhere around there, mid to late 30s. And so he founded the Henry Ford Company. However, he left. Within a year, he left because the company took on some investors. The investors disagreed with him on certain things. So he decided to leave the company, and he wanted to take his name with it too. So Henry Ford Company, he left. He took his name with him. They called it the Cadillac Company, by the way. Kind of a cool story. That's how Cadillac happened. Ford left, became Cadillac. Anyways, Henry Ford continues. He wants to try to keep making these quad cycles. So in 1902, he invents the Ford Motor Company. In 1902, he forms it. All right, Ford Motor. Ford Motor Company. All right. So he wants to, his goal for this is, he's heard about Carl Benz. He heard about him 10 years ago. Carl Benz essentially made Mercedes-Benz. All right, so Mercedes-Benz, Benz was making high-end cars. They were very expensive. Only very, very rich people could get one of those automobiles. They only made a few thousand per year, maybe a few hundred per year at most back then. And there was also something called an Oldsmobile too. Again, super expensive. No one could afford it. There was only, a few hundred made a year, a few thousand total. So Ford, his idea was, you know what? Let's try to make some cheaper cars. Let's try to make them as cheap as possible. So he contacted two guys. Their names are cool. You might know them from their last name. John and Horace, they were brothers. John and Horace Dodge. They were machine factory owners who essentially just had parts, who made parts. They were machinists back then. That's what they did. All right, so Ford contacts them. He's like, hey, can you give me some cheap parts? And can I start building some of these quad cycles in your facility? And they said yes. All right, so they started working with Dodge. Now, eventually Dodge left over time, and that's a whole different story. We're not going to get into that. But anyways, this allowed Ford to make cheaper and cheaper and cheaper cars. All right, so between 1903 and 1907, Ford produced about 1,000 to 2,000 cars per year, which was pretty good. Not great, but that was pretty good. 1,000 to 2,000 cars per year. Other car companies were doing around the same amounts. But this, for the horse population, for the horse problem, it was doing a little bit, it was putting a tiny dent in it, but it was still a crisis, all right? Not too many people owned cars, but there was enough to kind of make it a little bit stable, the horse manure crisis. Horse population was still, it was, the crisis was not solved at the time, okay? That's what I'm trying to say here. Until 1908. 1908, Ford produces, obviously, as you guys probably know, the Model T. Why is this important? Well, this was the first automobile to be produced in mass quantities, mass production of an automobile. So instead of producing maybe 1,000 or 2,000 a year of these, in the first year they were doing, tens of thousands, I believe, I think. I forget the exact number here, but they went from making 10,000s of these to very shortly making hundreds of thousands to making millions. All right, this we're not talking about decades. We're talking a few years here. They went to making millions of these cars per year, and so these were very cheap cars. They were in today's dollars, you could probably buy one for about 15 to 20 grand. Very cheap cars. All right, and so millions of people bought this. What do you think happened? All of a sudden, they have a way to get around in cities. Now, cities weren't quite prepared for this right off the bat, so they had to kind of rearrange in where you could park and where you're allowed to stop on the road and things like that. But the Model T solved this horse manure crisis. The Model T essentially gave everyone a car. Horses were no longer needed. So the horse population over the next couple decades went down by about 75% in a few decades. Now, there was actually this thing I looked up called peak horse, by the way. Have you heard of peak oil? So peak oil is, we were supposed to top out on oil production, whatever, a few years ago. Sometimes some people say by 2020, now it's 2040 or something like that. But, you know, they're supposed to be peak horse. And, you know, sometimes I saw some stuff online saying peak horse was 1940, some saying 1950, some saying 1960. But peak horse happened and the horse population went down by 75% because of the Model T. So all of a sudden, this giant crisis that no government could figure out or no city planners knew how to deal with, it was solved. It was not solved by, you know, government, or it was solved by an entrepreneur, which is kind of cool. And he wasn't trying to solve the horse manure problem. He just thought it was kind of cool. He wanted to make a business out of this motor vehicle, out of a motor vehicle. And it took a long time too. Keep in mind, from the time he made his first quad cycle until the time where the Model T was produced, I mean, we're talking 12 years. We're talking 12 years before the company actually became a thing. A long time to be dedicated to something. And so here's what I wanted to, what's the moral of this, I guess? And this is something that I've thought about a lot. I think about it often, is that a lot of the top new innovations in the world, the general population doesn't see them coming for the most part. You might see them coming like a year before, but you don't see them coming 5 years out, 10 years out. Definitely not more than that. So for example, like I just talked about with my girlfriend's grandpa, I should say, about like, did you ever predict that something like TV or radio could exist? And he was like, no, never saw this coming. Just one day we saw it in a shop and we got it, and you had to get a license for a radio or something back then, some weird thing like that. But he never saw the radio or TV coming. I asked her uncle what she thought about, or what he thought about, you know, did you guys ever see the internet or computers becoming so big? They were like, no. We were shocked. I mean, I talked to my mom about this too. Shocked when something like Atari came out. I mean, and you never saw anything like this coming. It just kind of came out of nowhere, it seems like. For my generation, definitely smartphones. Smartphones was definitely the thing. I mean, I had a Razor phone back then. I had a little old BlackBerry too. In like 2004, I had a Razor. BlackBerry was somewhere after that. But like, I never thought there would be apps where you can, like Instagram and Snapchat that, and you know, even Facebook's big. And I never thought that there would be apps on there. And online video, I never really saw that coming either, for the most part too. But smartphones in general, my generation did not see that coming. So, I mean, the kind of general moral of this is that, yeah, you never, giant trends, you never really see them coming for the most part. There's a lot of predictions that do come true, but a lot of the times they don't. I mean, I remember I asked, well, it might have been my grandparents actually, about, did you guys think we'd have flying cars by now? And like they said, yeah, we thought they'd have it like 20 years ago. Now we kind of do, but they're talking about it in mass quantities. They thought we'd be flying around everywhere in the Jetsons and have everyone have a robot, and everyone would have, you know, their own personal, like cook, like robot cook or whatever from the Jetsons. None of that came true. What came true was the internet. What came true was computers, smartphones, apps, YouTube, whatever it may be. Those are the stuff that came true. So what do you guys think is the next trend? I want to ask you guys that actually. What do you guys think, if you could make a prediction, do you think it's AI? What do you guys think? What's the next blast off tech going to be? Now these tend to happen only once in a generation, by the way. Smartphone and the internet and, you know, TV and radio, they're once in a generation type things. It's not like we're going to have a giant technological innovation in the next 2 years. It's not going to happen. All right, we've had ours for maybe once a decade. We'll have a big one. Once every decade or two, maybe every 30 years, there's a giant leap that comes out of nowhere. The last one I get my parents was the internet. Mine was a smartphone. I guess the difference between that, the internet was like 94-ish, 93, somewhere around there. Smartphones 07, so 14 years. So every decade to 2 decades, 15 years or so, there's a giant leap. So what do you think it is? Leave a comment down below. Yeah, actually, I want to mention one more thing too, is that Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Crushing It, actually. So I think it's normally on sale for about, I think on Amazon it's between 25 and 30 bucks or so, Canadian dollars, and US is probably a little bit less. So we're going to give you like 40% off, 50% off. So if you want to Joisk right now, and you want to support this channel, go and buy Gary V's book, Crushing It. It's a really good book. Let's see, we'll put it on there for like between 15 and 17 bucks. Obviously, if you're in Canada, it's free shipping. US, I might put free shipping on that too, but it would mean a lot to me. It's a great book, and obviously it's Gary Vee, so you know it has to be good. But again, yeah, please check out Joisk. I've been working hard at that. Still have a lot of work to do, but we're having more products up on there, and still, I'm still amazed. And thank you guys so much for checking it out and buying and selling. And yeah, we had sellers sign up. It's all crazy. It's all crazy. It's all coming true right now. It's all weird. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Please check out Joisk. You're all very beautiful people. Hit that subscribe button or leave a review if you liked this video. And I'll see you guys hopefully tomorrow.